with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Wednesday, May 25th, 2022. My name is Sam Seder. This is the five-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Harvey Kaye, Professor Emeritus of Democracy and Justice Studies at the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay, and Alan Minsky, Executive Director of Progressive Democrats of America, on a 21st century economic bill of rights. First, 19 children, 2 adults murdered in a mass shooting in Texas, in a Texas elementary school. Joe Manchin and Republicans flummoxed as to why this keeps happening. Nancy Pelosi, too, who did robocalls for NRA-backed Henry Cuellar, leads Jessica Cisneros in the Texas 28 primary by 100 votes. Speaking of which, primary results, huge turnout in Georgia. Trump-backed candidates lose there, except for, of course, Marjorie Taylor Greene. Meanwhile, recount still looming in that Pennsylvania Republican Senate primary. Today marks the second anniversary of the George Floyd killing. 1.1 million Afghan children face severe malnutrition. And Indiana lawmakers override a trans sports bill veto to protect high school sports from 1 or 2 trans athletes.
The legislative process in America.
All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Sad day. Emma Vigeland here joining me as always. Obviously, sad day. Yesterday was, we had another mass killing, this time again, well, I should say again, of elementary school children, 19 of whom were shot to death by an 18-year-old man who, young man, I guess, who purchased a couple of semi-automatic weapons as soon as he turned 18, which was, I guess, within the past month or so, and then shot his grandmother, 66-year-old woman who realized he was leaving the house fully armed for some reason, and then drove his vehicle toward an elementary school. It's unclear whether he was specifically targeting the elementary school, although it really appears he was. But, we still don't have full information on any of this stuff. Crashed his vehicle and then was somehow confronted by at least some police officers at that point as he was entering the school. Got into the school, killed 19 children, killed a teacher, and then was confronted by border security guards who were in the area and were brought in because they had more tactical gear. Apparently, the shooter wounded at least one police officer on his way in, wounded a couple of these others, and then was killed himself. Again, after killing 19 kids ranging from, I think, 10 and 11 years old, 9-year-olds. Still also multiple children injured, wounded in the hospital. They have identified the killer. His name is Salvador Ramos. Apparently was bullied as a child, and but very difficult to assess, what's going on there. There were initial reports that he had body armor. It appears that he did not. And everything else, I mean, I've been doing this iteration of the show for 12 years. 2 years after the Heller case, where all bets were off in terms of gun control. And I cannot tell you how many times we've done this. I was just talking to Matt before the show. We used to have Cliff Schechter on the program regularly. He worked for a anti-gun organization years ago. And there were times where it seemed like every third week we would be talking about a mass shooting incident. And literally, as I'm looking through the stories and the sound, it's all the same. It's all the same.
It's super eerie, too, given, Matt also made a great point when we were chatting before the show about how there is such a crossover, too, with these shooters and violence against women and having that kind of history. And in Sandy Hook, the shooter there was targeting his mother, right? Female relative, if I'm not mistaken. This shooter also it seems, shot his grandmother.
Yeah, and it's unclear as to whether, that was part of the plan, or she said don't go, or whatever it was. But the details are going to change. The small details are going to be changed. The thing that's identical is the reaction. Joe Manchin out there, I don't know why we can't have a sensible gun. Well, of course you do. The guy started his campaign for Senate by taking an AR-15 and shooting at a cap and trade bill. If you really were running against the cap and trade bill, which of course he was, you could have just burned it. But no, you had to. You wanted the weapon there because it showed how strong you were. It showed how big your member was.
In the same breath, he says that he doesn't want to do anything to the filibuster to make that sensible gun reform happen.
Of course.
So nothing will.
Of course. It's a joke.
And the Senate wants to go on Memorial Day vacation, so, right, there's priorities here.
And look, the fact of the matter is that the American public, even those who are in favor of gun control, they don't put that as their top priority when they vote. I don't. And we know from the data that most people do not. The people who put it as their top priority are the people who want to buy more and more guns. Because we know in this country, and the number of guns have just exploded. It's just unbelievable. There's supposedly 15 million more guns that were bought because of the pandemic. And the number of gun owners has not grown particularly that much. It is just that the gun owners themselves just keep buying more and more guns. There's been some expansion of the number of gun owners, but not commensurate with the number of guns that have been sold. And I want to make this clear, because at one point, and yesterday we were talking about the different rulings from the Supreme Court in terms of eviscerating the ability for our government to really govern, to eviscerate the administrative and regulatory state. We will see the Supreme Court reverse an individual right for people to get an abortion that has existed in this country for 50 years. That is probably a month away, maybe less. We saw the Supreme Court basically say your right to an effective defense in a capital punishment case, when we're going to where the state's going to execute you, basically ends if you can't get a good attorney to prove that you had a bad attorney in the first place. So it's really sort of a really hollow right that is specifically enumerated, we should say, in the Constitution, the Sixth Amendment. And for 230 some odd years of our country's history, there was no fundamental right for the individual to carry a firearm. You had the ability to do it in many states, but the government had a right to had the ability to encumber that right. Here's a piece from the Smithsonian Magazine. This is from 2018. Gun control is as old as the Old West. This is the frontier. It's part of the country. This took place, in the 1880s. Dodge City, 1878. Scroll down.
Yeah, why Earp was enforcing gun control.
Tombstone, Arizona. Tombstone's not Arizona, but you had all sorts of Dodge City, Albany, whatever it is. You enter the town, you got to disarm. You either do it at a hotel or the local lawman's office. This is just an example. They had it in colonial times too, on saying how you had to store your gun in your house. Probably 100 years before this. There is a long, 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 long history, to the extent that this country has existed, of gun control in this country. But in 2008, 5 conservative justices decided that's over. I mean, go back to the Burger Court. What did Warren Burger say? And this is,
And while you're finding that, just to point out, the laws of tombstones that require visitors to disarm at a hotel or lawman's office, those are still alive at the NRA conference that's happening in Houston over the weekend, where Donald Trump's going to be speaking, where guns are not going to be allowed.
Well, yeah, the idea that you shouldn't bring guns into certain places, you're an idiot. The only idiots in the NRA, it's not stupid. They understand. But the question is, whether the government can abridge that right, or where did that right come from? It was created by a 5-4 court in 2008 in the Heller case. Here's Warren Burger, who was Chief Justice in, the 50s, I think it was. The gun lobby's interpretation of the Second Amendment is one of the greatest pieces of fraud, I repeat the word fraud, on the American people by special interest groups that I have ever seen in my lifetime. The real purpose of the Second Amendment was to ensure that state armies, the militia, would be maintained for the defense of the state. The very language of the Second Amendment refutes any argument that it was intended to guarantee every citizen an unfettered right to any kind of weapon he or she desires. And we know this. We know this because why can't you have a tank? Why can't you own a Stinger missile? Because we know it's really just like that the state has the right to practice. And I mentioned this, which is not to say, look, the Supreme Court. I did an interview yesterday with William Forbath and Joseph Fishkin. They wrote a book called The Anti-Oligarchy Constitution, Reconstructing the Economic Foundations of Democracy. Well, it may come up in our conversation with Harvey Kaye and Alan Minsky. But the point is that they're talking in terms of redistribution, in terms of wealth. But the fact of the matter is, Supreme Court is a political body. It has always been a political body. How quickly it responds to politics is a little bit slower because president appoints them, Senate confirms them, unless, of course, it was Mitch McConnell and Barack Obama. And this right is ultimately a function of our democracy. It's a warped version of democracy because the same Supreme Court also allows for unfettered expenditures. And so the NRA buys this. And again, it's also one of those situations where the gun nuts, and I do mean nuts, they vote on this basis. The Republican Party is organized around it. It's not exclusively the function of the Republican Party. Again, we'll play this audio from Nancy Pelosi doing a robocall for an NRA-backed Henry Cuellar. I get it. She wants to maintain her majority in the House. We won't. Unlikely, and certainly, but you can't really do anything about these issues if you're going to expend that much energy re-electing someone who is so closely aligned with the
from the NRA.
The NRA. But this is a right that was created almost whole cloth by the Supreme Court. We know this because for 240 years of our country's existence, the Supreme Court, and I think everyone understands that there were large periods of time where the Supreme Court was they wouldn't even allow, let's be clear, the Lochner era. We can say the Lochner era. That was the Supreme Court saying to the state of New York, you cannot limit the number of hours that workers work. They wouldn't allow child labor laws. There have been plenty of times in this country where the Supreme Court has been completely reactionary. We're at that point again. So if they wanted to, or they felt that it was obvious that there was an unfettered right to have weapons in this country, they would have ruled that way. But they didn't, because they didn't. It was just in 2008. That's when that right appeared all of a sudden. So people should be aware of that because, it's just another example of the importance of the judiciary in our system. I don't mean that one should have esteem for it. I just mean that you should be aware of it. The same way that, you don't have to have esteem for a pothole, but you should be aware of it when you're driving down the street so that you don't, destroy your car, particularly one that is this deep and wide. And, so here we are, we have clips that we can play.
Let's do it.
But they're literally I don't know. It's just a different guy saying them.
You could put it any year, basically.
No kidding.
Next to these
Seriously.
It's the worst version of Groundhog Day ever.
Let's just play Joe Biden because this is we'll just range from futile to just ridiculous, basically. But this is
So, Biden's address came from a place of, he's lost multiple children. That, I think, cynically, frankly, the White House sees that as a point of, that they can hit on because it's obviously, they perceive him as the empathy president. And so they think that he can hit these right notes here. But part of it's enraging because as much as the pain that Biden has gone through in that way, I think is horrific. There's no legislative solution that is even being discussed, and it won't be because the Senate wants to go on recess, and frankly, they don't want to do anything institutionally in the Senate that would allow for any gun measures to pass.
And to be clear, there's not a lot of room they can do because of the Supreme Court, and this just gets back to the failure of the Biden administration to do what they can do. Right? There are limits to what they can do legislatively. There are limits that we can do with the bully pulpit. I mean, I am fully aware of this and sympathetic to it. But there's a lot of things that Joe Biden could have done over the past year and a half to put us in a slightly better position to deal with this.
And fine, if the Supreme Court strikes this stuff down, then so be it, though. But that doesn't mean you don't swing.
Well, that's right. But also, I would also just say, like, we need to understand that the Supreme Court is a political body. Joe Biden commissioned a report on the Supreme Court, I don't know, a year ago. And we never talked about it because it amounted to nothing. Because he put a bunch of institutionalists on there because he wanted to protect the sanctity of the Supreme Court when it is bullcrap. It is. It's just bull. It's bull.
I mean, yeah, there's nothing sacrosanct about it. It's like polluted and as sewery as possible.
And would that make a difference right now? No, it wouldn't make a material difference now. But it would decrease the timeline. What the Republicans understood and conservatives understood when they lost the Supreme Court that they needed to start working to take it back. And it took them 50 years. 50 years. And these guys are still punting.
Yep.
There's no reason to believe that it's going to take any less time. This is stuff that should have been started 10 years ago by people like the president, who is a Democrat. But let's hear his talk here. And the funny thing is, not funny. The ridiculous thing is, they think it's going to make a difference politically, and it never does.
Well, let's hear it. I have something to say about that.
As a nation, we have to ask, when in God's name are we going to stand up to the gun lobby? When in God's name we do what we all know in our gut needs to be done? It's been 3,448 days, 10 years since I stood up at a high school in Connecticut, a grade school in Connecticut, where another gunman massacred 26 people, including 20 first graders at Sandy Hook Elementary School. Since then, there have been over 900 incidents of gunfires reported on school grounds. Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. Santa Fe High School in Texas. Oxford High School in Michigan. The list goes on, and the list grows when it includes mass shootings at places like movie theaters, houses of worship, as we saw just 10 days ago at a grocery store in Buffalo, New York. I am sick and tired of it. We have to act. And don't tell me we can't have an impact on this carnage. I spent my career as a senator and a vice president working to pass common sense gun laws. We can and won't prevent every tragedy, but we know they work and have positive impact. When we passed the assault weapons ban, mass shootings went down. When the law expired, mass shootings tripled. The idea that an 18-year-old kid can walk into a gun store and buy 2 assault weapons is just wrong. What in God's name do you need an assault weapon for except to kill someone?
I'm just, when he says we need to act, you need to act.
He's saying exactly what Steve Kerr, the head coach of the Golden State Warriors, said. Like, when are we going to do something? It's literally verbatim what the head coach of a basketball team said.
I mean, frankly, it's terrible politics, and it's even electorally, outside of the fact that it's enraging. because people want to see a president acting himself or herself. They want to see action being taken. And frankly, the arrogance of the Democrats on this in terms of just, well, we see public opinion polling, 90% of people want universal background checks, 10% don't. Fine, you can cherry pick statistics that show that, you know, that there are different ideas for gun control that might favor Democrats in a vacuum, basically. But the Republican Party doesn't operate on polling and public opinion. They act with the urgency of a minoritarian party, which is what they are. Abortion rights are popular. Abortion bans are unpopular. And guess what's happening right now? We're about to ban abortion in many states throughout this country, and Roe v. Wade's about to be overturned. So they're playing on an entirely different field. The Democrats are acting as if public opinion is going to just gradually move the political tides in their favor without them really having to do anything. That Republicans can be shamed into changing their ways, and then eventually the fever will break. It's part of that same thing. When the reality is that you guys are just playing two separate games, and the Republicans are winning and like winning over. Are winning on their playing field, basically. So I don't want to play the popular opinion game. It's not about popularity. This is about power. You have to seize power because it's life and death.
And all of this, you know, and we're going to take a break in a second here and get to Harvey and Alan in just a moment. But at the end of the day, you know, this is, again, about the Democratic leadership. And I know there's a lot of people who are like, why aren't you talking about the Republicans? Because you know. Everyone watching this knows.
Yes. That
where the Republican Party stands with this. And but none of us here know where the Democratic Party stands on this. And that is because, on one hand, the Democratic leaders come out and talk about we have to get rid of the power of the NRA. And literally, on the other hand, they are recording robocalls for a congressman in Texas in a primary last night who gets an A rating from the NRA on top of also being against abortion rights, and who's going to very possibly win that primary by 100 votes out of 45,000 cast. So that's why we're talking about the Democrats, because we know where the Republicans stand. But the Democrats are sending mixed messages. There's no other way to assess that. And you're not going to win when you're fighting for power, when you're sending completely mixed messages. You're just not. We need new leadership. There's just no other question about it. This leadership has failed. It has failed not even in executing an agenda. It has failed in even articulating a specific agenda.
Just really quickly, the Schumer quote. I mean, I'm sorry, but Schumer said on a gun bill that there's no gun bill imminent. I can just read it, guys. Schumer says no gun bill imminent, tells Jake Sherman of Punchbowl News. Americans can make a choice, Schumer says. Americans can cast their vote in November. Some of them, if Cuellar holds on, can cast a vote for somebody who has an A rating with the NRA on the Democratic ticket. Schumer says Republicans can work with Democrats now to craft a bill. He's skeptical. Unlikely. Burnt in the past.
I mean, Americans can make a choice. How much money was expended by the DCCC to tell the voters in Texas 28, vote for the guy who gets an A rating with the NRA?
That's the choice you guys made. That's the choice Pelosi made. That's the choice Clyburn made. They stand for big tents, but they can't stand for gun violence and abortion rights. I mean, these are the things that they fundraise off of, and yet they can't even stick to that. I mean, Like, all you guys just had to do was just let the primary play out, right? But they couldn't, because they care more about cementing their own power than they care about any principle of politics. Any principle.
Yeah, I mean, it's undeniable. I mean, with a 100-vote difference out of 45,000 votes cast, if Nancy Pelosi's robocall could not sway 101 votes, just the absence of it couldn't sway 101 votes, then she's also a horrible leader. Like, why are we wasting our any time or money on that?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, it is what it is there. All right, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to talk to Harvey Kaye and Alan Minsky about, what the Democrats should be running on, and a far more bold approach to, and one that is rooted in the history in this country, of both the country and the Democratic Party, for that matter. All right, we'll take a quick break. We'll be right back with Harvey Kaye and Alan Minsky on the 21st Century Economic Bill of Rights. We are back. Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. It is a pleasure to welcome back to the program Harvey Kaye, Professor Emeritus of Democracy and Justice Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay. And welcome Alan Minsky, Executive Director of Progressive Democrats of America, on their call and their enumeration of a 21st Century Economic Bill of Rights. Guys, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Harvey, let's start with you. Where are we in terms of straying from the concept of an economic Bill of Rights, or maybe better yet, let me put it, where did this first develop, this idea?
Okay, this idea was first proposed by Franklin Roosevelt. It's best known for having been the centerpiece of his 1944 State of the Union address to Congress and the nation. But the important point before I mention what he did is that in 1943, FDR wanted to know what Americans wanted after the war when it came to social policies. And he had already laid out back in 1932, when he was running for president, the idea of an economic declaration of rights. And in 1941, in a State of the Union, he had projected a vision of the four freedoms: freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. He now commissioned a major national survey, secretly, you might say, to find out what did Americans want. And what he discovered, among the things he discovered, is that 85% of Americans wanted what we would call universal health care, a guarantee of health care. They wanted comfortable housing assured. They wanted jobs with living wages. And this was just selected items of a long list of questions that they were asked. And he felt confident at the outset of 44, which was not only the time for the State of the Union address, but it was also in some ways the launching of his fourth campaign for the presidency. And in that State of the Union message, he said, we've reached a point in American history where we've come to accept basically the idea, the necessity of a second Bill of Rights. In fact, he said, look, we know that needy men, and we would add women, needy men are not free men. And he laid out a series of what he considered to be essential new rights to be recognized in a fashion, whether by way of amendment or by way of congressional action, that would literally sort of take America from the war effort into a whole new peacetime effort, and would remain, he believed, intact. And if you think about it like that, that was a great vision, though probably he knew he couldn't get it too quickly, because between the Republicans in Congress aligned with the Southern Democrats, who, by the way, were not opposed to the concept, but they were afraid it might represent an undermining of segregation and white supremacy in the South. So he knew he might face opposition. Well, after the war, Truman did make certain efforts in that direction. But the idea of an economic Bill of Rights, although it never really was enacted, at least not aggressively so in part until things did begin to happen in the 60s, was actually the framework, very explicitly the framework for the 1960 Democratic Party platform, the authors of which actually were worried Kennedy was not liberal enough to accept it, because he actually used to say, I'm not a liberal, And then in 1965, 66, all the more enthused by the Great Society and War and Poverty efforts, A. Philip Randolph, the great labor and civil rights leader, projected the idea of a freedom budget. Not the idea, he actually laid out in a pamphlet, and I forgot we were going to be visual today. I'll just show you. This was the pamphlet itself, a freedom budget for all Americans. And it was a call, literally a call to wipe out poverty in America, and laid out a whole series of initiatives and what it would cost. And I will tell you, 150 university presidents, foundation heads, labor leaders, in other words, practically every prominent figure in the sort of center left to the left endorsed it. All the names are indicated in the pamphlet. And this was his call. But of course, we know all too well, tragically, the war in Vietnam literally drained away the resources that might have driven LBJ to take that war on poverty all the further. And then finally, in terms of the 60s, Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968, not long before his assassination, published a piece in one of the major American magazines of the day, a call for an economic Bill of Rights. At that point, it generally speaking was on the agenda, given what had become the Democratic Party agenda in the 60s, but it did not, in the course of the 70s, advance, period. What they saw in this, of course, was Medicare, Medicaid, and a series of things in the 60s. And it was revived, however, by Bernie Sanders in his 2019-2020 campaign on the website, though unfortunately he did not take it into the presidential debates, or for that matter, into his campaign generally.
All right. Well, I want to get back to why that didn't happen, but let's jump to Alan. Tell us what is in the 21st century economic Bill of Rights. I mean, you have 10, fundamental elements or rights that would be enumerated.
Well, we just today put up a web page on the PDA website, which is pdamerica.org/economic bill of rights with no spaces in between. So pdamerica.org/economic bill of rights. Do you want me to go through and read them?
Yeah. I mean, we'll put a link to this, but let's go through them and enumerate them. And of course, this is, this is it is both a messaging document and a material document, right? I mean, in yes. both respects. I mean, it is both good policy and good politics. Right. But read them off for us.
Sure thing. Just to say quickly, we wrote 3 articles, and in the second article, for each one of these, all 10 that I'm about to read, we matched them up with really existing legislation in the contemporary Congress that basically puts forward this. In other words, we're making the point that the Bernie Sanders squad, left progressive wing of the Democratic Party already supports this. So it's a messaging thing to accent the fact that emphasizing economics is a very important thing that the progressive Democrats broadly understood need to do more in terms of this election cycle and all election cycles going forward, and at least in the near future. So here they are. A 21st century economic bill of rights will guarantee all people residing in the United States the right to the essentials of a good life, regardless of their income, race, religion, gender, sexual orientation, or country of origins. So the 10 items are: 1, a useful job that pays a living wage; 2, a voice in the workplace through a union and collective bargaining; 3, comprehensive quality health care; 4, complete cost-free public education and access to broadband internet; 5, decent, safe, affordable housing. And remember, these are all we're saying should be guaranteed rights in society. 6, a clean environment and a healthy planet. 7, a meaningful endowment of resources at birth and a secure retirement, so youth and early life and end of life. 8, sound banking and financial services. 9, an equitable and economically fair justice system. 10, recreation and participation in civic and democratic life. The word recreation, by the way, is one thing that we kept as a word itself from the Roosevelt era. You can look at that line and say the right to guaranteed paid vacation. So 10 is recreation and participation in civic and democratic life. So those are the 10, with number 1 at the top again, a useful job that pays a living wage.
I'm interested, Alan, and Harvey, you can weigh in on this too. The use of the concept of freedom as a linchpin for FDR, and sort of the abandonment of it. It seems to me in the, both as a rhetorical device, but also as a concept that because so much of what we, by the left, by the center left, by the Democrats, progressives, however you want to say it, that libertarians sort of and conservatives sort of took over, hijacked the concept of freedom or liberty, and have redefined it as something where they are unencumbered by any type of action by government that promotes these values, as opposed to an individual's freedom or liberty from the that government can actually provide for them in against sort of the idea of need or economic coercion or outside threats.
Harvey, why don't you take that? But let me just say, I am just doing big cheerleading for your leading question, Sam, because it's right on point. Take it away, Harvey.
Yeah, well, first of all, I mean, as long as we've got the idea of messaging in our heads, I mean, FDR, whatever his faults and failings were, was an absolutely brilliant messenger. And he always rooted whatever he did in this idea of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that was the fundamental American promise, which is why when he first envisioned something like this economic Bill of Rights, he talked about an economic declaration of rights. He wanted he said, in the course of the 19th century and the Gilded Age, we've allowed the titans of industry, in other words, the big industrial capitalists, to hijack the American promise. And it's time we take back and renew that promise. But to do that, we need to remember that even then, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness was a signal that economic security, that economic opportunity were fundamental to that American promise. And so really, whenever he spoke, he always tried to root it fundamentally in that revolutionary moment of 1776. I mean, my thinking is that, yeah, that we've kind of lost touch with that. And by the way, if you were to read, say, The Nation, you'd probably see the word rights along the way. And if you read the National Review, you'd see the word liberty regularly along the way. And that was what FDR may well have feared, the possibility that indeed, because he warned at the end of his State of the Union address, he said, beware of rightist reaction. And he didn't mean the likes of those who stormed the on January 6th, the Capitol. He actually meant the corporate bosses. As he said, it was a wealthy business figure who told him, be careful about the right-wing reactionary corporate interests coming after this. So, I mean, I hope I'm getting to the point, and that is that the question of rights is freedom and liberty in FDR's mind. And what we need to remember is that we've allowed a certain language, a certain, I hate to use a postmodern term, discourse, to be hijacked truly by the right. And in fact, I think all too often, and this is my view at least, all too often we've generally allowed the right ever since Ronald Reagan to do a massive hijacking of the American story and the American imagination.
Well, frankly, I feel that, you know, without a coordinated offensive, right, like the one that you're advocating for, where it's a broad policy set that includes rights for all Americans, economic rights, and I think the theme of the show today is democratic leadership failures, and it's just these tweaks to the system. You're ceding the framing to the right wing in the way that you describe, Harvey. So, I mean, we also, in talking about the response to the shooting, we were saying how there needs to be a massive shift in leadership. There's a absence of imagination that I think is inherent to this, and they wouldn't even entertain these concepts, frankly.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, Alan might well mention that the candidates, at least that his organization, Progressive Democrats, have embraced and endorsed, have themselves been asked whether they could take this on as part of their mission. And I'll just, before we get into that, I'll just say that my greatest hope was that Nina Turner was going to win in Cleveland, because she was so enthusiastic about this. And I thought this would be she would be, excuse the metaphor, the vehicle to take this into the Progressive Caucus, or at least into the squad. The word rejuvenate is improper because they're all much younger than I am, but to revive the energies that we saw at the outset of their formation. Right, Alan?
Yeah,
I'll leave that to you.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's really sort of crazy that the progressive movement writ large doesn't lead more with economics. I mean, simply put, and for decades, and currently at this moment with inflationary concerns, economics is polling as the top concern for the American public. Okay, right there, you have to speak to the electorate. Okay, the left progressive movement has allowed itself to be defined by basically jerks like Bill Maher as being all about, you know, messaging that suffocates public discourse, okay, or whatever issue of the day they want to highlight as what the left progressives are about. You actually look at the work of the actual progressives in Congress, in this Congress last year, and what they were focused on, just absolutely laser focused on, was making all of the statutes in Build Back Better more economically progressive. You know, the center right would say, no, this goes too far. They would take it another direction. They'd even propose something better. So the actual work they were doing was on core economics. And really, if we had a unified left progressive movement, which we need to have because we're looking at the absence of a leading progressive presidential candidate for 2024. And we really need to have coordination where economic messaging is at the really front and center of what we stand for, because these are incredibly popular positions when you fill in the public policy positions for all 10 of those points. I mean, you look at the polling among Democrats, registered Democrats, and it's an astronomical blowout that we should be winning all of these elections. Now we know incumbency, the power of incumbency, the power of money, and all that can do to pollute the airwaves in these small congressional districts can really skew the results. And that's what we're seeing across the country. We had a victory against massive amounts of money in Pennsylvania last week, and also one now that's official out in Oregon. But my word, these are difficult. Buying congressional races is an easy thing to do in the era of Citizens United. So how do we face that? We face that with basically run a national unified messaging campaign as best as possible. I mean, it's going to have some fluctuations here and there, but if you lead with economics on that, and by the way, this in no way abandons any of the other issues. By all measures, the progressive movement is going to be the greatest ally for the transgendered movement, for all of the issues that otherwise are being spoken about. But this needs to come up as really the top central focus of the issue of the progressive left. One, because it's a winning hand. No, two, because it was a winning hand. And one, because it's already the work that we stand for. It's the most difficult lift because, let's face it, American big money, American capital, in all of its power and force, is going to be arrayed against this message in ways that they're not going to be against other messages. So.
What is the mechanism for that? I mean, because we do have look, Nina Turner was outspent, or at least, in terms of the South Side money, it came in hard, and we watch Cisneros have to, she sort of tempered her message a little bit, I think, for a changing district. But again, there were, incumbency forces and the Democratic leadership and, NRA and that weigh in on this. They're not going away, right? I mean, those things exist. What is the mechanism? And I accept the premise that there needs to be a sort of like a 20,000, 30,000 foot type of narrative that stretches, that provides its own sort of umbrella for, and this is that message. But what's the apparatus that gets everyone on the same page, that carries that message, so that when Nina Turner or Summer Lee was able to pull it off in Pennsylvania, but if you want to increase the sort of percentage of success, I guess. What is the apparatus that provides at least the context for those races to happen and gives them a slight leg up on day one?
Right. Well, obviously, it takes a lot of internal coordination among the progressive left, which is a very difficult thing to achieve for a whole bunch of reasons that I think all of us talking are relatively familiar with. But from the point of view of Progressive Democrats of America, which is one of the organizations that's at the table with organizations like Our Revolution, Justice Democrats, all the way out on the left wing to DSA, I mean, we'll be advocating for this over the next period. The midterm elections are, of course, a different dynamic than the presidential races. But again, are we going to have a really powerful progressive champion in the 2024 primaries? If we do, then we certainly piggyback off of a candidate like Bernie Sanders, who would be leading with this. If Elizabeth Warren runs, and of course, PDA, if people don't know, we were the original Bernie Sanders PAC. We are very proud to be the organization that brought the Bernie Sanders presidential campaign to the world. We drafted him as the only organization to run the Run Bernie Run drafting effort, and going all the way back to 2013. But if you look at a candidate like Elizabeth Warren, for all the foibles and difficulties she had with her race, she clearly does lead on economic matters. And I think, you look at the presidential candidates and you can see that if they're going to compete, they understand how prominent this has to be. But it gets dissipated by the time you get to the midterms. In all due respect, we probably have about 4 years to figure that one out, but I think we should start working on it right away. And certainly PDA will be advocating for this. Clearly, it's going to be a central focus of our advocacy going forward. And I do think the results would be better. If we're going to come out of this with 7 to 10 members of the squad, I bet you we can add to that considerably, or would have added to that in this cycle. Of course, we don't know where the world will be in 4 years.
What's the number? Is there a number? I mean, does anybody have a number? Like, I mean, look, we watched the Freedom Caucus, and we never knew how many people were in the Freedom Caucus. That was one of their sort of like their features. We're not going to, it's like Fight Club type of thing. And I'm not exactly sure what the value of that was, other than they could probably project, they didn't have defections because nobody knew whether or not the people were in there anyways. Mm-hmm. I mean, you can see the value of it on some level, and it's certainly consistent with the brand in terms of lack of transparency. But what is there? Does someone have a number? Like, I mean, is someone they're saying that
we're 50 to 75, actually. So focus on the squad is a little disingenuous. You look at people like Jim McGovern out in Massachusetts; he's rock solid with us. Right?
Worcester,
there are bunches of them, right? But it's less than the Progressive Caucus.
Okay,
there definitely are weak progressive.
What's the number we need? Like, where is the 215? Okay, well, I understand.
I do not. I mean, look. I mean, the things we're proposing, you know how absurd the historical moment is. And of course, this is an incredibly complex question. But if you look at America's top allies around the world throughout the whole Cold War period, we know which countries they were: Western Europe, South Korea, Japan. I mean, some of them because of conquest and all that. But basically, they all have this economic contract, social contract, and we don't. And even more of a craziness about it is, of course, the Roosevelt and Truman administration actually went in and drafted a lot of these constitutions that guaranteed the existence of social democracy. Now, neoliberalism has chipped away at it, but look, not really. They all have free universal health care. They largely have all free public education through higher education. That even just got expanded in Germany under Angela Merkel. So we're the one country that doesn't have it. This is not a utopian scheme that's impossible to imagine how it would be operating, right? So, you know,
but if we have to honestly, but Alan, if we have to wait for 218 people in Congress to sign on, I mean, is there a number that anybody has contemplated that understands the Congress where they're saying, and you know, okay, so there's actually the Progressive Caucus is probably closer to 50 to 75, and we're waiting, and we've talked to AOC and Representative Omar on this program, and they both brought up the idea of like, this is no, you know, we need to make this not just you pay $4,000 and you get the tour of the Progressive Caucus. We need to start having litmus tests so that we can, you know, create some meaningful. We know the parameters of when we can count. You know, we know the whip count before we actually go out there. Is there anybody out there who said like, you know, if we had 65 people, maybe it's 75, maybe it's 50. I don't know. We would be able to leverage this in this way. I mean, because if it's 218, I mean, you know, I want to be at least, I want to have some, you know, at least descendants that will.
Yeah. Well, first of all, the first step under 218, if you just want to do it simply, would be half of that plus one. Once it becomes the majority of the caucus, then clearly the Democratic Party is standing for these things, is out in front of the public in a way that is very clear. Now, under Jayapal's leadership and Pocan too, on these matters, public facing, they would advocate for this. They would call for this. I mean, they were both brave enough to support Bernie Sanders for president in 2020. And so, you know, you start getting up towards 120. Okay, let's say we have to get to where the Progressive Caucus has a stronger hand in advocating for that. Again, probably cut in half plus one. So, you know, you're getting down to with just a quarter of the Congress being really, really solid, but bold advocates for this. They do need to be bold advocates, because within the range of about the 20 to 70 that we have, many of them aren't. Now, it's difficult to get that much press and focus on you, as you know very well, if you're just one of the Congress people. But again, once we get the Progressive Caucus, as it's been built up, Jayapal's done an incredible job organizing it. You know?
What about in the Senate? I mean, because, you know, we've to the extent that these things would have passed if there wasn't an awareness that the Senate was going to kill it anyways, you know, we might have had different votes. But what about in the Senate?
Okay, well, of course, you're getting to what is the best shot at achieving this quickly, which is to the executive branch in a race nationally, because these issues are very popular. In the Senate right now, we maybe have like 3 to 7 people who really consistently stand with this agenda. And potentially we're going to get one pickup in Pennsylvania in that regard. So, yes, slow moving in the Senate, and that goes to how expensive Senate races are. But again, the presidency, the most expensive is the race, of course, that more Americans pay attention to. And we saw a tremendous performance there in terms of the popularity of these issues on the national stage. On Senate races, in many respects, those are the hardest lift, because the cost of Senate races can be prohibitive for where the money is on the progressive left, and because of Citizens United, and we can compete more at the House level. But, you know, again, we got to get involved state by state and start getting these champions onto the Senate ticket and not shy away from that and build up the movement. I do think, even with some mixed results, and right now as it stands, disappointing result last night, we are the political movement with as much momentum as any political movement within electoral politics in the country. So that is still true.
Harvey, let me ask you just, I guess, a more conceptual question too, to get back to those ideas. You cite the Declaration of Independence and FDR's 4 freedoms. Why not the Constitution? I interviewed some folks. It was a pre-record, but William Forbath and Joseph Fishkin, law professors. And they've just come out with a book, The Anti-Oligarchy Constitution, subtitle Reconstructing the Economic Foundations of Democracy. But the idea being that the Constitution was a document that was, look, it fundamentally, even if you accept the frame of the right to some extent, that it is a document that inhibits the federal government's ability to, constrain the states or individuals. That is a statement against consolidated, concentrated power in and of itself, right? I mean, because, when the Constitution is written, they're talking about, they don't want a king. And what is a king if not Bill Gates, right? Someone who has an incredible concentration of wealth that they can deploy to change the course of a country or of a society. And, at that time, there was no, the only Bill Gates is around at that time wore crowns for the most part. And so this is a document that is written to constrain consolidated power. And it vests the power in we the people, which suggests that power and wealth should be distributed amongst we the people. And so why not also, if we're getting back to the idea of like, we need a broad framework and need to recapture the narrative, capture by the right of these founding documents and these concepts. Why not also, let's take back the Constitution too.
That's great. We do know that it's almost impossible to get amendments passed, but we do know that the preamble to the Constitution.
Honestly, do we need them? Do we need them?
Quite possibly no. But this is a question also, as you were saying that, and I'm intending to read Forbath's book. I do want to say that FDR, I go back to FDR, and I will say that in 1936, when he was going to run once again for president, when he accepted the nomination, and the entire platform at that point was laid out in terms of the Declaration of Independence, he went before the stadium audience and he warned of economic royalists. He grabbed hold of that original idea. You mentioned aristocracy. He said, we fought a revolution and we set up a country in order not to have political royalists. He said, today, the economic royalists say that we want to overthrow American institutions. And maybe the next line, he said, well, they're right about one thing. We want to overthrow something. We want to overthrow their power. Wouldn't you love to hear? By the way, Bernie Sanders might have taken that next step if he was more aggressive about grabbing hold of the past than he was. But it is the case that that kind of language would definitely resonate among Americans. I could easily imagine a candidate running simply in terms of the preamble to the Constitution and the Commonwealth, the common welfare. Those are the kinds of things. It's not simply a language. It's also the idea that, look, to my mind, the Democrats have literally turned their back on the progressive and radical story of America over and over again. And by the way, that I include in that even the progressives. Okay. And the fact is that the American imagination is waiting to be, if you like, redeemed and tapped. The greatest, look, not the greatest. In one sense, it's the greatest in the Voldemort sense. Roosevelt was the history teacher in chief. Ronald Reagan worshipped FDR's memory, turned it inside out. But he knew that if you're going to transform, you also have to tell a story, not merely offer an agenda. And in part, this proposal that we've made is an effort not only to lay out 10 rights, economic rights, it's also the idea of starting to take back that story and cultivating the story for the 21st century. I have no argument with taking hold of the Constitution. I think the 14th Amendment should have been used far more often than it has been.
And it's also, we should also say that, the value of this is not just, you're not necessarily even taking back a story. You are tapping into a pre-existing almost primal narrative that exists amongst the American public.
Absolutely.
And it is much easier to activate something that is already, where there's already a foundation, where there's already an understanding, and that it's almost an inarticulated understanding of the way that the country should be. And tapping into that makes it a lot easier. You're suddenly going with the flow of the river of our history, I guess. But Harvey Kaye, Alan Minsky, thank you so much for this. We will put a link to all the URLs you mentioned, and and to these and to this economic Bill of Rights. Really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you very much.
Thank
you both. I appreciate all your work too.
It's good to see you all.
Yeah, it's good to see you.
All right, folks, we're going to head into the fun half, I guess. Fair warning, the fun half is not going to be that fun today. We have a few fun clips. We have a few fun clips. We're going to be talking more about the, obviously, the shooting and the reactions to it, many of which are sort of anemic and futile, but and some which I think are just indicative of where the power lies in the Republican Party. Just a reminder, your support makes this show possible. You can become a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. Again, if you do not have the financial resources, send us an email, write funhalf at majorityreporters@gmail.com. No one will be locked out for financial reasons. And just give us a little bit of time to get back to you, but we will get there, I promise. Also, don't forget, justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code MAJORITY, get 10% off. Matt, what's happening in the Matt Leckian media universe?
Yeah, tonight on Left Reckoning, Matt Huber talks with David and I about his book, Climate Change as Class War. So we get into it's a really smart book about how we just need to frame these things in terms of in more Marxist terms. We talk about the PMC problem, where people think that like their individual choices, but even if it's like going to conferences less for academic conferences, like there's too many people thinking that that's the actual game and not seizing hold of the fossil fuel power complex. But so check that out tonight, patreon.com/Left Reckoning. We talk about Elon Musk in the post game tonight.
I can't wait for that guy to go broke.
It'll be fun. Yeah, but sometimes you're just like too rich, and then that means for some reason you're never broke.
He'll never be able to get broke. Not enough.
Even if they tried.
All right, 646-257-3920 is the number. You can also IM the program by picking up the app at majorityapp.com. See you in the fun half.
3 months from now, 6 months from now, 9 months from now. And I don't think it's going to be the same as it looks like in 6 months from now. And I don't know if it's necessarily going to be better 6 months from now than it is 3 months from now. But I think around 18 months out, we're going to look back and go like, wow. What? What is that going on? It's nuts. Wait a second. Hold on for a second.
Emma, welcome to the program.
Hey.
Matt.
What is up, everyone?
Nomi Key.
You did it. Let's go, Brandon.
Let's go, Brandon.
Bradley, you want to say hello?
Sorry to disappoint everyone. I'm just a random guy.
It's all the boys today.
Fundamentally false.
No, I'm sorry. Women's...
Stop talking for a second. Now let me finish.
Where is this coming from, dude?
But dude, you want to smoke this 7A?
Yes.
Hi, me? Is it?
Yes.
Is this me?
Is it me?
It is you.
Is this me? Hello, is this me?
I think it is you. Who is you? No sound.
Every single freaking day. What's on your mind?
Sports. We can discuss free markets and we can discuss capitalism.
I'm gonna go throw up.
Libertarians.
They're so stupid, though.
Common sense says, of course.
Gobbledygook.
We fucking nailed nailed him.
So what's 79 plus 21?
Challenge met.
I'm positively quivering.
I believe 96, I want to say. 857-210-35. 501. 1/2. 3/8.
9/11, for instance.
$3,400, $1,900.
5, 4, $3 trillion sold. It's a zero-sum game.
Actually, you're making me think less of it.
But let me say this. Poop.
You can call it satire. Sam goes, it's satire.
On top of it all, my favorite part about you is just like every day, all day, like everything you do.
Without a doubt. Hey, buddy, we see you. All right, folks.
It's just the week being weeded out, obviously.
Yeah, sun's out, guns out. I don't know.
But you should know.
People just don't like to entertain ideas anymore.
I have a question. Who cares?
Our chat is enabled, folks.
I love it.
I do love that.
Look, gotta jump. Gotta be quick. I gotta jump.
I'm losing it, bro.
2 o'clock. We're already late, and the guy's being a dick. So screw him. Sent to a gulag?
Outrageous.
Like, what is wrong with you?
Love you, bye.
Love you. Bye-bye. We are back, ladies and gentlemen. Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland.